The UN Conference on Climate Change begins in Paris on Monday. 193 member countries, and they're going to try to reach an agreement on climate change and greenhouse gases. The Montreal Economic Institute is an independent and not-for-profit research organization, and it's just published a guide on the Paris conference. Youri Chassin is with the Montreal Economic Institute. You know, I looked through the guide. It's really, really interesting, and there's a reason why you thought it was necessary, because this is not meant for scientists and professionals. This is meant for people who are trying to figure out what everybody is talking about here.
Exactly. For the ordinary citizen who's get, an interest in that topic, because we hear a lot, but sometimes it's hard to say, well, where do I begin my search? Where can I learn the first basic questions and the first answers to those questions? So we put it together, and the first chapter of our guide is basically 20 questions and answers about climate change. And where do we stand in Canada, for example, and what do we have to do? And then we explore, for example, public policies about climate change.
What do you think are some of the biggest misconceptions that we have about climate change?
Well, I think that what we don't really understand is how we are affecting right now the climate of the future. So there's a long time gap between the emissions of
the cause and effect is very far apart.
Also, we don't understand what we are already doing, because we hear a lot of talk of new, policy tools, for example, to implement more carbon pricing. What are we already doing is not that clear. And for example, Canadians already pay for fuels taxes that amount to almost 20 billion a year. So this is why, in practice, it's hard for government to find good policies to implement.
Yeah, because again, we were talking to David Suzuki yesterday, and it's
Absolutely.
always that balance, right? How do you protect the environment, but also protect the economy at the same time? I mean, that's a major challenge, isn't it?
Absolutely. And yesterday, David Suzuki told us that if we don't change the way we think, for example, and we approach this problem from an economic perspective, we won't get that far. I beg to differ. Obviously, I'm an economist, but I think economics has something to put on the table in terms of choices. What is the most efficient way of reducing GHG emissions? For example, what we have seen right now is that, for example, the subsidizing of renewable energies or subsidizing the purchase of electric cars is really expensive and hence really less efficient than other ways. Now, it's always a problem of political choices. What we explore, we don't recommend really ways to do things in Canada, but we provide some basic principles, and we are kind of interested to see, for example, the experiment in British Columbia, where the carbon tax is revenue neutral, so we lower taxes to compensate the citizens.
But I think what I found most interesting is, they're going to try to come out with some kind of an accord, but instead of the governments pushing for things, you also say in the guide that the consumer demand is forcing companies to respond in a greener way.
Absolutely. I think this is an achievement of the ecological or the environmental lobby, because basically people are conscious about climate change and they do ask for greener products, greener services. So eventually companies have to provide those kind of products to meet this new demand. There's an interest for them, there's profit to be made on that. So basically this is the big push that we observe, and there is change. We actually observe changing ways in the business activities.
Well, thank you so much, and thank you for the guide. And if you want to download the guide, it is available on the Montreal Economic Institute website, and it's a very easy read, so it's
Thank you.
So thank you very much for putting that together for us. And we'll be right back.